Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. A real pleasure to be with you here in Cannes. Maybe for people who haven't seen The Plague yet, you can give us a brief intro. What can people expect going into your movie?
Yes, so The Plague is a sort of psychological drama horror set in 2003 at an all-boys water polo summer camp. And it's about this one boy named Ben who is navigating sort of his own social anxiety and the pretty kind of brutal, savage sort of social order of groups of boys who are that age at this camp, and trying to sort of fit in with the group and dealing with all the kind of complicated dynamics surrounding that.
The idea was sparked by you actually going back and remembering your experience at being at one of these sort of sports summer camps, and even kind of mining your own journals and memories for some of the situations and characters, etc.
Yes, exactly. I was sort of staying with my parents for a little bit during COVID and cleaning out my childhood bedroom and finding my old journals. And I found these ones from when I was 12 and 13, when I went to this all-boys sports camp, and there was this idea of the plague. I don't want to say too much about it before people see the film, but some of the characters and the people I knew growing up and some of the experiences that summer were kind of like the launching point to go write the script.
I guess it probably does veer into a kind of psychological horror. But I was thinking, actually, a lot of the time, especially sort of in recent years, we've really been associating that kind of genre more with like female-led films or female protagonists. Often we don't see it as, focus on a boy or coming-of-age male. What do you think was interesting to kind of play within that genre, but putting the fixation more on the male journey instead?
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of movies about younger boys are more, either a little more of like a bro-y movie, like kind of hanging out, or a little more like a nostalgic kind of coming of age. There's more films about young girls about being uncomfortable in your body and bullying, like films like Carrie and Raw, obviously, and Eighth Grade. And so I think there's been fewer of those about boys because there's like a vulnerability in being that kind of like object of, horror, of terror, or of just being uncomfortable in your body. And so it felt really exciting to show a boy who feels, insecure and in peril and overwhelmed the way that you see in those other films.
Within that sort of, playing with genre tropes, where do you see that this film sits? Because sometimes it feels like, we are, while, there is this idea of the plague, which, isn't supposed to be real. At other times we feel like we are veering into something where it's like, hang on, is there something else going on here? So did you almost want to play with audience expectations a little bit all the way through the film? And even with the soundtrack and the way it's shot, everything, there's sort of like a dissonance there or a discomfort.
Definitely. I mean, I think I wanted it to feel very psychological, and so I think the genre elements are sort of born out of that. And so my goal is to really like immerse the audience in the experience of being a 12-year-old boy, and that can be a very high anxiety place to live. And so the score and the sound and the way it's shot, we're all trying to really mirror sort of his internal state and his emotional state at any given moment in the film.
And I think that definitely plays into the almost like body horror, like, sort of like really focusing on the skin. And I guess that does tap in when you're watching a film to something more visceral. You feel it in your body rather than something you're just like watching the narrative, watching the evolution of the characters.
Totally. No, some people have told me they feel itchy after they leave, and I think that's great.
And what an incredible cast. A lot of them, I think, whether they're quite inexperienced or their first time in front of the camera, one you even found on Instagram. Why was it important to you, I guess, to kind of get that authenticity in terms of, the people playing these characters, but particularly finding boys of this age? Because I guess, well, we sort of joke about that, don't we, in high school films, people are actually like in their 20s or something, but these are actually genuinely young lads.
No, it was really important to me and to all the producers and our casting director, Rebecca, that we find real 12 and 13-year-old boys, because I think that's sort of one of the things that's most cinematic about the film, is capturing that age in reality and everything that comes with that, where your face is growing a little bit every day, and there's just something, even the level your voice sits at, it's like a very particular time. So we really didn't want to cast older boys, even though you get longer days and all that stuff.
And how did you was it Instagram that you found?
So some of them, like, Everett, I had seen his most recent film, Griffin in the Summer. I thought he was incredible in that, and so I thought, oh my God, this would be a perfect Ben. I saw Kenny, who plays Eli, like he was in the first round of tapes, and immediately I knew that he had to play that role. KO, who plays Jake, I did find him on Instagram. He's on this page called New York Nico, where it's sort of like all these sort of like big personalities around New York. It's a great Instagram page. And KO was sort of going around pranking people, skateboarding, being crazy. And I just was like, this guy could be perfect for Jake. So we found him, we tracked him down and brought him in. And he, hadn't really done an audition like this before, but he nailed it. And, we knew that he was, had to be Jake.
And I guess you did kind of put them through the ringer in the sense of not just sort of the psychological kind of intense and emotional intensity of some of the scenes, but also like on a physical level, like doing the pool scenes and the swimming. What were some of the highlights, but maybe some of the challenges of the shoot, particularly bearing in mind that they are so young?
So we had sort of like 1 week of rehearsal with all the boys, and we had part of that included like a water polo training camp. So we were teaching them how to play the game, and then they'd sort of get out and we'd do costume fittings, and then we'd rehearse scenes, and so it was kind of fun. And some of them had not played water polo at all, and barely even swim, and by the end of the week we're like weirdly very good, or pretty good for being not professional water polo players.
And maybe you can talk a bit about having Joel Edgerton on board. I mean, such a phenomenal actor, and I was just saying earlier, actually, like I think he's one of these talents though as well, that he really chooses his projects carefully. He doesn't just sort of ever take a cash grab. So having him involved, kind of, I know he's really connected with your script, but not only to act in it, but also as producer. What was it like to have him involved in your project?
It was amazing. I've been like a fan of his for many years. He's one of my favorite actors. Everything I see him in, I think he's great. So it was kind of a dream to have him both act in it and work as a producer, where he could kind of, because he's a great director himself and storyteller. So he was sort of there as a mentor for me to just talk through the story and talk through the way I was approaching it as a filmmaker. And, he was always sort of ready to hop on the phone and chat. So watch and edit. He's a really great guy, and he's really passionate about making films.
And in terms of the takeaways or, the thematic kind of considerations of the film, maybe it's almost become a hackneyed phrase about like toxic masculinity, because it feels like it's probably even going something that's slightly more nuanced than that, not necessarily, this kind of more sort of recent thing of Andrew Tate, et cetera, but something that, everyone might go through at this age, that desire to fit in, and how you can become complicit in certain types of behavior in order to sort of perform a certain type of masculinity. So how much did you want to kind of tune in to current conversations, or perhaps get people just thinking about things in a sort of more kind of traditional way?
Yeah, I felt like if I would just try to be as sort of personal and honest as I could, that it would feel universal in terms of exploring sort of masculinity. And, I think just these ideas of everyone, of wanting to fit in, of wanting to follow the code of a group and navigating that with your own values is universal. And I think when that comes to particular groups of boys or groups of young men, obviously that comes with its own set of challenges and difficulties. So I think I wrote it from a very personal place, and I found talking to, women and men, but obviously a lot of men, that even from many different countries, it seems like there's a lot of overlap in people's experiences of sort of structures of masculinity. So it's been interesting to see how that, those are really cemented in our culture and even across different generations.
And do you sort of feel like actually that's something that's always been there? Or do you think that it's something that is kind of intensifying or taking on new forms in our current era? And, is that something that that's prompted conversations when people have watched the film?
I think there's a degree to which it's always been there. I feel like there's often this sort of masculine, aspiration towards power and towards, sitting in a sort of a place of status within a group, and that can involve, in this case, sometimes cruelty or sometimes bullying or any other behaviors that people feel is necessary to sort of earn their way into that position. And so I think that's sort of been there forever. And I think obviously it's sort of things shape differently as the culture changes. You know, this film set in 2003, but even today with social media, and you see it in something like Adolescence, it's like that's taking on a whole new set of challenges. But I do think it comes from the same core, you know, dynamics and sort of human conflicts of just how to navigate your own sense of identity against the sense of trying to fit in and feel like you belong in a group.
What's it meant to you to have the film here at Cannes Film Festival?
It's, you know, it's the greatest honor I could imagine. I think it's the greatest festival, and I've you know, dreamt of having a film here my whole life. So I'm thrilled to get to premiere the film here.
Being able to watch it, you know, in the cinema with the
in
audience
that theater,
here.
yeah, with 1,000 people, it was surreal and incredible, and something I've never experienced in my life.
Do you ever sort of feel like people react in the way you're expecting? I mean, I can imagine you just like could cut the tension with a knife. You know?
I mean, we've done, you know, small screenings in New York as we were editing, but nothing close to this. I mean, it was a thrill to watch the audience react and gasp and laugh and
squirm.
yeah, totally.
And what's going to be next for you? Have you already got another project in mind?
Yes, I'm making a sort of darkly comedic adaptation of The Mask of the Red Death, the Edgar Allan Poe story, with A24 and Picture Start, and that should be shooting in early 2026.
Amazing. And that's the other thing I was going to ask actually about the tone, because even though it can feel quite dark and unsettling, I do feel like there's almost some, like, you know, borderline comedic moments in the film as well. Is that something that you quite like to play with?
Absolutely. I mean, my favorite films are always blending tones, and you see that with something like Parasite or in Paul Thomas Anderson's films or in Carrie. And yeah, I love stuff that has real humor and then it kind of pivots into something that's really unsettling and then back again.
And do you feel like sometimes people also can get a bit too boxed in with genre? You know, as we were saying before, like, oh, this is kind of, you know, women's, you know, power and you know, the psychological horror genre is very much about the female experience, whereas actually you're saying, well, no, not necessarily. And it's like always interesting to have filmmakers that aren't sort of abiding by some of those confines or those labels.
Definitely. I mean, I love genre, and I think it's really fun to try to study it and think about how audiences will expect certain things to happen and play with how those things, you know, you can subvert those tropes. I think in this case especially, I was trying to build it so much from the character and from his experience that kind of led the storytelling more than coming at it from a genre approach.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with me.
Thank you.
Huge congrats on the film.
Yeah, thank you.
Really enjoy your rest of the time here in Cannes. Thanks.
All right, cool.